Hello, this is Patrick Dunn, and I'm just going to run through a short Takucha presentation that I did at the really fantastic Informatology conference in London in the UK a few weeks ago. So my concern is that learning designers, instructional designers, are not getting how to design learning games, serious games, because there's a kind of chasm between instructional design and learning games design, and I think it's a cultural chasm that's quite tricky to bridge, but I'm going to make some suggestions as to how we bridge it. So I'm interested in the confluence between three areas: gaming, massive cultural phenomenon of gaming; social learning, so social gaming; and rapidization, by which I mean the way in which everything in the digital domain is getting easier and cheaper to produce. The tools we have now to produce digital media are fabulous. Let's talk about gaming. Massive cultural phenomenon. Look at this one. Social game, Farmville, 80 million players a month. In most Western countries, we spend more on games than we do on films now. So we launched this war game. $500 million of sales in the first day. So games are making a huge impact on society. What it looks like is that games contain a number of characteristics that are very powerful in terms of providing learning experiences. And you can divide those characteristics into three broad areas. They are motivation, narration, and simulation. And of course there are many different types of games. If you look down here on the right, many different types of games. And often the type of game that you're dealing with is determined by the particular mix of those powerful learning characteristics. Now, in theory, if you're a good learning designer, a good instructional designer, you should be able to move fairly fluently up and down a spectrum, at one end of which is e-learning courses, and at the other end of which is learning games. And you'd move up and down that spectrum simply by assembling the components of your learning experience in different ways. So just imagine you've got your design mixing bowl. Depending on what components or ingredients you put into your mixing bowl, you should, in theory, be able to produce something that's more or less game-like. So there's no clear distinction between courses and games, because it just depends on the individual and the specific mix. But what I'm experiencing and what I'm hearing from clients is that actually what we end up with is something that games designers call chocolate-coloured broccoli, or in other words, a kind of boring experience with a slightly sweet surface layer. And the reason is that the things we're producing aren't particularly game-like. They have a kind of game-like surface on them. And my theory, or my hypothesis you might say, is that there's this cultural chasm, and I'll explain what I mean by culture in a minute, between course design and learning game design. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by culture. So this is a representation of the components of culture. Culture comes in lots of layers. We have a solid outer layer, signs and symbols. At the core are beliefs, and in between there's these things called norms, behaviors, and competence. And we're talking here about geographical cultures or organizational or professional cultures. So my belief is that in order to move from course design to games design, instructional designers need to address the belief sets and their competence. Let's talk about beliefs first. So my experience of working with many designers over lots of years is that learning designers seem to think in terms of content. They seem to have a deep belief that by presenting content to people, we may be able to change them. And of course, the games designers are right at the opposite end of the spectrum. They create experiences because they know it's experiences that change people, not content. Instructional designers seem to think that, or seem to believe that, we learn things one step at a time in series, whereas if you look at many games, they address learning issues and performance issues by throwing lots of stuff at us in parallel. We learn in parallel, not series. We don't learn step by step. We learn lots of things at once. Instructional designers seem to think we have to acquiesce towards our learners. We mustn't push them too hard because they might go away. Whereas games designers love to challenge their users. They increase performance through challenge, not by conceding, not by surrendering. I think a lot of instructional design surrenders. And then the final belief I think we need to shift is that learning can be essentially emotionally neutral. And that's what a lot of instructional designers seem to aspire towards, whereas, of course, games designers try and make everything emotive. In fact, you might say one of the defining characteristics of a game is its emotional component. So that's beliefs. Now let's look at competence. Very simply, instructional designers need to know more about gaming patterns, or in other words, those repetitive components of games that you assemble to produce gameplay. Secondly, instructional designers need to develop storytelling skills, a key component of many, many game types, including not particularly simulation-based ones. A key component is narration, is characterization, narrative arcs, the components of storytelling that games designers do so well. The third competence is a process one. Instructional designers need to get away from this overstructured linear approach to developing learning experiences and adopt experimental processes, messy, iterative experimental processes, because that's how you get creative quality, and that's how you get good ideas. Then finally, the final area of competence is around feelings of playfulness. It's really interesting when you go to games design agencies how playful the environment tends to be. Whereas in instructional design agencies, you often find this kind of robust engineering type sense to the place. So anyway, that was a quick run through. Thank you very much. As I say, this was done for the Informatology conference, and it's all about leaping the chasm between instructional design and games design. Thank you.